Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are reviewing the weekend with Jamie and Laurence. Good to have you, Jamie.
Laurence, hey mate.
Let's just talk first of all about the big headline of the weekend. Basically, the title race is still open, and it feels like different to where it was last year, where people go, no, it was Man City and Arsenal, because there are multiple dogs in the race, or there are multiple teams that are running that actually feel like they have a chance to go the full length, if that makes sense. Arsenal, Liverpool, City, Spurs were in it a few weeks ago, but I'm taking them out of the conversation. I think there's three runners in my mind, and I'd just like to know how this kind of shapes up for you, because I always feel like you can identify title runners, but just being in the race, by the definition of being in the race, I'm not even sure that we're necessarily saying that the people who are in it are like the most capable of winning it. There's going to be a rank of capability, but just being in the race and being like shoulder to shoulder with someone influences their race, if that makes sense. And that's where I think this is different to last year, because I felt that City always had the superiority. Even though Arsenal were new, we always knew there was like a superior element. I feel like it's different this year.
Yeah, there's different types of title race, aren't there? You have the title race, which is a non-title race, which is one team is way better. And then there's a second team. United finished second 1 year.
Which that was like that. I mean, they were nowhere near City that year.
And they were nowhere near it.
Yeah. Arsenal arguably were that last year. And I think they made the Premier League more interesting. But realistically, when you look back at it, you went, yeah.
Well, this is the question.
Still good though.
There's that other type of title race, which is like the table will say it's very close. But as a viewer, you go into a huge amount of confidence.
Your gut tells you something different, right?
Exactly, in one of the two sides. And then you have this year, and this year's a little bit of a debate, because City never really fire on all fronts in the first half of the season. I think that it's not for today, but generally they change something. So they go to the box midfield, or they bring in a new centre forward, or they drop Cancelo, etc., etc. Liverpool and Arsenal both are in it. They have different strengths and weaknesses. The real question that's interesting to me is, do City have all of this like potential kinetic energy where you just, in your head, kind of need to add 10 points to their tally? Because in March or April, every year they're so consistent on kicking on. Or is there something different about the City side? And we're actually not so convinced this is like that, and it truly is a three-horse race.
So I think what's different to previous year, there's different things for each team that's different to previous years, right? So I think there's different characters in the Arsenal team that are going to be, first of all, different in the sense that they've learned from the previous season, and then they've added what I think are really consistent characters. So I think Declan Rice is an incredibly consistent character. I think Jurrien Timber would have been a much more consistent character for them this season. And I think actually the addition of someone like Raya shows a level of intent from the side that is different to where it was before. And possibly something that we'd never really characterised Arsenal or Arteta for previously, but an element of ruthlessness. It's pretty ruthless to have a goalkeeper who most people were pretty content with and go, actually, we can improve on that. Because a lot of people would kind of, not necessarily everyone, but be of the opinion of like, he's done his job. Like, you got pretty close to the title last year. Give him another bite at the cherry or the apple or whatever the fruit is. This is not that. This is, you're actually trying to replace someone because these margins are going to change whether you win or lose. And the decisions he makes can influence the whole side. It's like traffic on a motorway, I think. That's the best way I can say it, is like, there's the opening scene of Mission Impossible 3 or whatever it is. And Tom Cruise is pretending he works in traffic. And he charms all these women at a party they go, what do you do? And he's like, I look at traffic trends. And they're like, okay, cool. And then he says, like, just one tap of the brakes and you can see how far back down the motorway that impacts things. And I feel like a goalkeeper is like that in a team. It's like one parry as opposed to holding the ball, and that impacts where the fullbacks are running, where the centre-backs go. One amazing save, and that can impact the rest of the side and bring the whole team back for a corner, and you can break on that. The goalkeeper is so underestimated in terms of his influence on the whole team and the rhythm. I think that's why they bought someone like Ramsdale out and Raya in.
Yeah, it's a stage of development, because this time last year, Arsenal were buying players who they thought were great players and were good players and good for the money. This year, they're not in that game. They're in the game of, we want to win the Premier League and be better than City. And rather than who are good players, that's no longer the question. The question is now, what 11 wins the league? And because they're different questions, you get different answers. And Aaron Ramsdale might have been the answer to the first question, but not the second.
I also think, to an extent, it's more like what 15 win the league or whatever it is. But you would have only had one goalkeeper in that 15. Or what 16 win the league and you would have only had one goalkeeper in that.
And that also, he's kind of an interesting character for Arsenal. But Kai Havertz comes in because what 15 or 16 win the Premier League? And Arteta said one involving Kai Havertz. On the goalkeeper, just briefly, no side has won the league without a top keeper. The worst keeper to ever win the league probably was Kasper Schmeichel, who was brilliant that season.
Also, then he maybe wasn't the worst goalkeeper ever to win the league.
But I don't know that there's the point being they're all top. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
Especially in the 21st century.
Yeah,
Fabian Barthez win the league?
No, and that's the point.
To be fair, he was a World Cup winning goalkeeper.
Barthez is a little bit Onana in as far as he'll make spectacular saves, but then make mistakes that average goalkeepers won't.
Right,
but
we don't remember that because he won a World Cup.
Correct.
Well, we do remember that. I remember there were many lorries at the time that were adorned in the dust on the back of the lorry with the phrase "Laurel and Hardy equals Barthez and Brown," and it was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That was a great. That was the banter. That was the Twitter back in the day. The back of a lorry.
The other thing I'd say about Arsenal, and I find this to be a good thing, not a bad thing, is they're much worse going forward, but they're still top of the league.
Right, so this was actually a question I wanted to ask you. This year, everyone's been so focused on attack. Arsenal's defence and their solidity might be the thing that wins them the league, but they're slightly less venomous.
I think that's the right way round, though, and I'll tell you why.
Probably.
I think going forward and having a rhythm and having a flow, it's a little bit... It's a fugazi, it's a fugazi. It's like hard.
It's a wazi, it's a woozy.
It's a wazi. It's hard to look, you can train it.
Two
you
more
can
martinis.
Every 7 minutes until one of us passes out.
Yeah.
But
it will be me.
But I don't know. But the structures that make you defensively solid tends to be a little bit more predictable and tend to get you out of holes in the way that away at Brentford, for example.
Right.
They won the game 1-0. It's a little bit of a cliche. The defenses win you titles, attackers win you games. It's
also such a shift in emphasis from what we were used to with Arsenal in the previous years. Although we knew that the two centre-backs were solid, what I mean is emphasis in terms of the coverage and the attention that they're now getting. There is a lot more attention on this as back line. And weirdly, it's because people are presenting it as a depleted back line. They don't really have a consistent right back. Zinchenko was heavily criticised over the weekend for, some people say, patchy ways of playing.
He gave it away for the goal.
An inconsistent, yeah.
He got a great assist, but then gave it away.
Yeah, and so there's that. And that, I think normally a lot of people would go, well, that's no basis to build from.
It's interesting with Arsenal, though, because one of the reasons why they're better defensively is the same reason they're not as good going forward. Mm-hmm. Teams are setting up against them like they would set up against City. So what that means in practical terms is Arsenal have more of the ball unchallenged in greater depth, in greater territory, but are struggling to make the final pass. Whereas last year, teams still clearly dropped off them.
Do you think we focus too much on... So you're speaking about broad systems and probably patterns of play, right? Mm. Do you think maybe the focus in the analysis at the moment is maybe too much individualistic and thinking about what a Bukayo Saka has done in this game or what this guy has done in this game? Or even when you look at what this guy does in a system, I still hear what this guy does, and very often we're not talking about the whole system. And it's like I said, if you're talking about traffic, it's silly to focus on the car that's braking. What you should be focusing on is how you then set up your traffic lights to relieve the pressure in the traffic, right? Or, how you then set up your, how fast should this part of the motorway be going or whatever?
We spoke about Victor Moses actually last week in the context of Conte. Mm-hmm. Victor Moses was the same footballer at 28 as he was at 27, more or less. But all of a sudden, in a system, his strengths were unlocked. So when you talk about, Declan Rice, who's been awesome, he totally has. No denying it. But he's playing in a system where Arsenal have a lot of the ball, and he has a little bit of a bird's eye view on repetitive situations where they lose it. The fullbacks tuck in really high. Zinchenko pops up to help him out. So I think you're right. There probably is less of an emphasis on the systems. especially when you're explaining, well, why aren't Arsenal scoring as many goals? And it's not that Saka's been bad or Martinelli's team's been shit. It's been, well, teams are dropping off. They have more of the ball, but it's a little bit less penetrating. And the goal they scored against Brentford, the Kai Havertz header, they've scored a number of goals flipping it to the back post. And I read this article from The Athletic, which is like the key for Arsenal is to continue feeding that back post.
It's definitely working. And I feel like it's also because different teams want to pull different players out of certain positions. And that's why you, obviously you press in certain areas and there are like triggers to that press. And you know, they don't just, I think a lot of people think, oh, you pick the weakest player on the team and then you trigger the press when the weakest player on the team has it. That seems to be the analysis. Again, it's quite individualistic, not very system-based.
It's got nothing, I say it's got nothing to do with the player. It does, but it's like, no one's pressing a right winger because he's come in from the cold.
Yeah, right.
It's either the ball goes to the fullback and you go, well, the sideline is there, therefore that's a press, or it's, okay, well, Van Dijk has now given it to Matip. It's got to be a centre-back. Oh, and as it so happens, Matip's playing right centre-back, which means our left winger
is less covered, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's all of that kind of thing, and I'm sure there are lots of things like that. But what I'm interested in with Arsenal in particular is whether it's fine doing that in games, for instance, where it is a Brentford or whatever. I want to know against like the very top teams whether they can continue that level of solidity. Now they kind of have so far this season, and I think credit to Arteta, he kind of saw that as you could see. I think it was Ramsdale after they won against City, like commented very publicly about we've gotten over a hump there. We've done something we haven't really done before, or like we've gotten over a mental block. I think he called it. That was interesting to look at. That's tactics and what happens on the field influencing everything else that's off it. And there's like that symbiosis of the two.
It's hard to say. I mean, my instinct is it's actually sometimes a little bit easier against the big sides because, like, if you look at the City-Arsenal game, the Arsenal won, it was a little bit like a chess match.
But that was very because of that, as John McKenzie would say, there's a lot of off the ball.
Yeah, there was a lot of like being very worried about transitions.
Or out of possession.
So the one worry I'd have for Arsenal defensively is if they lose either centre-backs, but really Saliba or Declan Rice, I think they're just a totally different side defensively.
Okay. Yeah, and I agree with that. And also I think in build-up, you're also a completely different team because...
Whereas Liverpool, just to make a comparative point, I don't think are as reliant on one individual or two individuals. They don't have a six anyway. So it's not like they have a six to lose, if you like. And they have a spare centre-half because you have Matip and Konate competing for one spot.
Joe Gomez, 210.
And Joe Gomez, who's a good player.
Joe Gomez has really come back into his own more recently as well. I'm kind of interested to see where he takes that.
And Quansah, it's early for him.
He's playing all the Europa League games, seems to be really, more than solid.
And this is where, and we'll get onto this, where if we talk a little bit about Liverpool and Arsenal, and you sort of go, well, comparatively, who's who in the title race, Liverpool to me feel less reliant on individuals. Now, you might look at Salah or Szoboszlai and say, Jamie, you lose one of them, it's a different side. It's not obvious to me.
Well, especially with the fact that I think that Klopp has kind of developed a level of game management, which he definitely showed against Fulham, which shows how adaptable Liverpool, in this instance, they've always been adaptable, I think, as a side. There's always been an adaptability in the shapes they can play in. I know broadly we can characterise the way they played in that 4-3-3, but I think, it was whether Mane would be the one coming deep, Firmino would be the one coming deep, Salah would be the one coming deep, similar to the way they won the game at Fulham on the weekend, where it was like, and I said this in my analysis video, bring Cody Gakpo on, push Nunez, Diaz and Gakpo, or whoever was on that left side at that point, up, and you leave a whole load of space. And where do the goals come? From the space that is evacuated by those strikers, or is made by the fact that you've got people just running onto the ball and striking it really well.
Do you perceive, you watch more Liverpool than I do,
yeah.
I perceive them to be more flexible now than ever, because when there was the last great Klopp side, in my head, I just have this image of Trent, Salah, and Henderson teaming up in the triangle on the right. I have the diagonal from Van Dijk. I have Bobby Firmino dropping in. I have Mane being magic on the left. But I knew what they were doing. Whereas this Liverpool team, I kind of feel like you lose a man at Newcastle, we adapt. It's not working against Fulham. On comes Gakpo.
I feel like that's kind of credit to Klopp. I think a lot of managers struggle in these times. They see trends coming before they're there, so they're having to plan. Obviously, we're going win now, but they're going, I'm trying to build a team that's going to last me probably 5 seasons, right? probably 3, and then I'm rotating at the 5. You get what I mean? And we're going, no, but win now. And I think that was the real problem for Klopp last year, was he was like, I want to play this progressive style of football. We're not quite sure how to do it. We have certain members of the team that aren't quite there yet, should we say? And there were some people who were maybe not bought in on the project.
When did you think the penny dropped for Klopp that he had to change what was
I think
working?
it dropped at the start of last season. And I think they bought in... I mean, I think it had dropped before that, and they knew what the blueprint they wanted to build was. And I think the real issue was they couldn't recruit in certain positions. I think it's very lucky Saudi Arabia came along when they did and went, we'll get Henderson and Fabinho, because...
They can't... they're both excellent players, but at that stage of their careers, they're not as good at the current Liverpool midfield are at doing that kind of job.
Yeah, it's not a criticism of Henderson or Fabinho to say you don't play or you haven't played for a very long time this new system. It's easy to evaluate Henderson and Fabinho and go, well, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and Yeah,
it's not that. It's just Alexis McAllister just won a World Cup doing it.
McAllister just won a World Cup.
He's 23.
But he's not done it playing the 6, but he's done it, doing a lot of McAllister things that Liverpool want him to do. Szoboszlai, incredibly young, talented player. I'm very surprised Liverpool had a run at Szoboszlai
relatively
unopposed. And I think, I look at Ryan Gravenberch and I see a player who needs a little bit more identity put into him, and a little bit more like the faith will, show in the end.
Where Liverpool have surprised me and impressed me is I would have assumed, and I've said this before, the midfield was too much in flux. Mm-hmm. Like 3-4 new faces, not the same system they've played, working it out all at once together. But God, they look title race ready. Whether they're title ready, I don't know, but they're in the race. They're in the conversation.
Being in the race, and I feel like the Fulham game kind of showed it. I think for me, it's not really a personnel issue or a tactical issue, though I think there is a mixture of tactics and like motivation maybe. There've been a few games now where Liverpool, I'm trying to work out what it is that stifled them. I'm trying to work out what it is that's like stymied the team's progress in that specific game. Because overall, I look at it and I go, I can see there's confidence. So tick, confidence throughout the side. I can't think of a player where I think of them as not confident. Maybe at one point Tsimikas. Joe Gomez looks confident. Matip, Konate. Maybe Konate has a slight knock in terms of confidence, but not broadly. Van Dijk. You could name up pretty much the whole team and go, you look confident. Maybe McAllister in terms of he knows he's not playing in the position he should be playing in. But even then.
I have a vague suggestion for the answer, and it's actually not something you would have said about Liverpool recently. And the same applies to City, which is in certain moments, they look slightly easy to play against when they don't have the ball. That's not a comment on the 90 minutes as a whole, by the way, in the same way it wasn't for City against Tottenham. But there's a slight sense of, they look dangerous every time they go forward. And I always think of that as quite a first half of the season phenomena. Mm-hmm. It tends to come out of the side over Christmas.
Because there's overcommitment at certain points. There's people who are played out of position and learn not to go.
Relationships that aren't fully developed.
And they get the feedback of don't wander out that position again because that's going to make it less. And suddenly they go, oh yeah.
And then you ask, well, what's the difference between Arsenal and Liverpool? Liverpool look better going forward, but Arsenal have had those relationships established and therefore don't look easy. Arsenal probably look like the most difficult teams to play against when they don't have the ball. This season,
I definitely get that. I felt that strangling ability on the weekend, the ability to control the opposition out of possession, and the ability to manipulate them almost to Arsenal's will and be like, you're gonna, or at least the ability to influence the game like that. Not every opposition is going to be evidently as influenced as a newly promoted side that you probably find quite easy to work around in your hands. You get what exactly what I mean. You see it in games. You saw Liverpool a couple of seasons ago before they were the quad competitors. But before that, it was people like this team are horrible to play against. Arsenal seem pretty horrible to play against now. And by the way, so do Liverpool.
You know what's interesting though too? I've never thought this before, but just now we're talking about it. The higher up you press, maybe this is intuitive. The higher up you press and the more aggressive you are, the smaller the room for error. So when Wolves were under Nuno and they played their 5-3-2 and you knew what you were getting, they were kind of solid every single week. Mm-hmm. Whereas City last night were off at 5%. Yeah. There was a tactical foul that they would have made had they got closer. There were a couple of transitions they lost out on and they conceded 3 times. So I think the thing about like teams that press high and defend high up the pitch, it's a rhythm. It's about fitness. It's about sharpness. And Arsenal have probably just been in a spell of looking very good. I don't know if the fact that they press so high up means that's a little bit more wobbly than I'm giving them credit for.
I get what you're saying. I think that's where I'm least worried about Liverpool. Whereas like I feel like what they've definitely done well, or what they are doing well at the moment, is rotating the team within the strength. So I know it's obvious to say play the players to the best of their strengths. In previous seasons, it looked a bit like, is Harvey Elliott playing in his very strongest iteration? Is Trent playing his very strongest iteration? Is that midfield the shape we want it to look? Is Salah that comfortable constantly being out there? Is Diaz balanced enough? Is Nunez definitely wasn't balanced enough? They found that element of balance and the give and go, but at the same time, what they've really managed to do is find a unit in each phase of the play. So they go, right, in each phase of the game, sorry, not phase of the play. So it's like, cool, start the game with this, and then about 70 minutes, we bring on this guy, and that Endo, everyone maligns Endo because they don't know what he's trying to achieve, or they see it as a defensive action, whereas actually it's a solidifying and
freeing up.
Yep.
Do you remember Yaya took the best sub in Premier League history? Newcastle 0, Manchester City 0.
Yeah.
Before they won the league for the first time. Second last game of the season. They win that. They just need to beat QPR on the final day, Aguero. And they take off David Silva and bring on Nigel de Jong with 15 minutes left or 20 minutes left. And everyone goes, what the fuck?
Yeah.
It shoves Yaya Toure 15 yards forward and he scores a brace and City win the league.
Exactly.
And basically haven't stopped winning the league.
But that's why. So Endo comes on the field. What's the surprise is look how free Trent looks. We take Soboslai off. I covered it again in my analysis on the channel. But like, it's the little changes they're making, and it's a very deliberate decision because I looked at the bench yesterday and Harvey Elliott, Curtis Jones. They had names on there that you would have maybe thought of as preferable for Klopp. But it shows how different he's thinking, or how different he's thinking to a lot of people who are trying to analyze it, by just not going. The previous idea with the sub was, bring on someone who's strong and will make you stronger. He's going, bring on someone who will shift the emphasis or do this. And the average positions, I know a lot of people poo all over average positions, but like, they're interesting to look at post-game for Liverpool because it feels as if the midfield gets evacuated and Liverpool kind of just, like you said, like push high and go, we're just going to overwhelm you.
Liverpool also do that well because the players all have slightly different profiles.
Yep.
Like Jota isn't the same as Diaz, who isn't the same as Gakpo, who, in fact, actually, if you look at your front five, Salah, Gakpo, Nunez, Jota, Diaz, in my mind, that's the 5 attacking players.
I like that.
They're all quite distinct profiles. Jota's a weirdo. No one in world football looks like Jota. Gakpo, ditto. Nunez is pretty unique. So the emphasis changes, right? I mean, like South Africa in the Rugby World Cup had the bomb squad, and they got tattoos saying the bomb squad.
Totally.
And they come on in the forwards and say, like, they just change all their forwards and say do the same thing as they just did, but fresher and newer. And that's not Liverpool. Liverpool have different emphases.
And seem to be very good at shifting.
Do you worry about Alisson getting injured?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I don't know how long he's going to be out. Kelleher did look quite shaky, and I don't blame him, but I remember there was a point where I texted a friend, I was emotional, and I was like, we lose because of him today. That's unfair.
It's tough to come in from the cold, though, isn't it?
Tough. I mean, he wasn't even in the cold. I think it was just like, he was Liverpool's number 2 goalkeeper as a young goalkeeper. Is that in the cold, or is that just like,
But he hasn't played regular football since last year, probably.
Okay, so fair enough. I get that. I also think, obviously, he's Alisson's number 2. Alisson has got such a huge profile in the team. You realise how much he does.
He's never injured either.
He's
so consistent. Like
relatively,
Alisson,
Alisson, for a while, he did go through like some weird injuries, but he definitely seemed to have gotten over that. It was weird. He seems to have certain kinds of injuries, and they come at very specific times of the year. A lot of it seems to be off travel.
I was going to say, is this the Brazilian Neymar, I want to go to my sister's birthday and or carnival thing?
No. Yeah, I wish. I feel like it's more like he seems to be someone who's, if he doesn't sleep well, he doesn't play well and maybe gets injured.
Yes.
It seems that way. I mean, I don't know what his sleep patterns are like, but I know I'm someone who has, puffy eyes when I don't sleep, so I know.
The other thing is, I think every team in the world would miss a goalkeeper. You spoke about the presence of a goalkeeper.
So proactive.
Yeah, and also just
so big.
Like he's like a dad, right?
Yeah, and he is literally a dad. But I also think the other side to that is like if you've got someone who's so massive and is so capable, you put the ball in the most impossible, or you're attempting to put the ball in the most impossible part of the goal. And if you have a goalkeeper with maybe a little less presence, a little less, I want to say more than presence, but I'm trying to work out what it is. I guess like pressure on you. Maybe it makes it sort of more like, okay, there's more goal to just go into here. I feel a little less pressure. If you've got a young goalkeeper who maybe looks a bit fresh-faced. For the third goal where it was Bobby Decordova-Reid, he can come in and just head across. And Kelleher's almost just like stopping and being like, oh no. And it's like, no, that's when you dive. Like, do you know? And I'm not saying I know better than a goalkeeper. I'm sure he knows very well.
But the other thing is,
other goalkeepers, you feel his recovery wasn't there.
But Liverpool also play high up the pitch, so your goalkeeper has a big
responsibility. This was
responsibility.
relatively deep at the time. But I get your point.
But as an additional point, like Liverpool press high, and Alisson's unbelievable in one-on-ones.
Yeah.
And Liverpool a little bit play the percentages there, where they say, well, we know our keeper will bail us out, and the reward outweighs the risk. Losing your goalkeeper in that context is a little bit dangerous.
Totally. And also, obviously, just having Alisson, I think, is just a very calming presence. I said it again in my analysis video, I feel like Liverpool needed to... I mean, maybe Klopp seems to be at the moment of the opinion of get out there and just do what I need you to do. We're not there to comfort you. We're not there to you're just out there. You're like a candle in the tornado or whatever. Sometimes that can go against you, but it does seem as if the rest of the team reacted to that and were like, right, we can't lose based on this.
You know who I'm finding difficult to analyse at the moment is Trent, because I think his role, he was picking up the ball in quite central areas in a way that I haven't seen exactly before. And it's cool. It's evolving in real time and it's really exciting. It makes me think that Southgate has a big old headache because it feels very difficult to leave him out. It's just not obvious where you have him given the systems are so different.
I think it has to be in the squad. And I think from there, you're probably looking at, is Reece James fit enough?
Kyle Walker, Trippier's ahead of him as well, probably at right back.
Probably, yeah. I don't know, maybe Trippier's slightly fallen down the pecking order. I'm not quite sure why. Yeah. He's mentally, for me,
He might play left back as well for England, is the thing.
Possibly.
If Shaw's not fit, it goes Shaw, Trippier, Chilwell, if everyone's fit.
So Manchester United aren't really in the points totals at the moment. I think it's best to leave City at the end. Manchester United aren't really in the points totals at the moment. They're definitely in chase for the top four, though. For saying they've had an absolute disaster of a season, I think they've lost some pretty big headline games or drawn some pretty big headline games or had some pretty humiliating moments. We're not talking about them as anything anywhere near the title. And I think at the start of the season, we expected them to push on and be like, I think a lot of people's top four was like City, and then a mixture of Arsenal, United.
I had Chelsea third.
Right.
Which now looks very silly. But
yeah, I think you were just maybe a season ahead of yourself.
I got excited by Poch.
But you could say the same about, I feel like...
But Chelsea have done the same thing. They've also it was, unlike with United, it was silly. United wasn't a silly suggestion to have them in the top four.
Not at the start of the season.
Chelsea probably were, but those are the two sides who have probably dropped off more than everyone expected.
Right, and that's what's maybe kind of frustrating for me, but I felt as well like I watched our Manchester United podcast back or just quality, control. When I was listening to it, a point struck me, felt pretty basic, but it was like, I see, the frustration for United must also be, I can kind of see what they're going for. But it seems so...
What are they going for?
They're trying to be a counter-attacking side right now. And as a counter-attacking side, you have to be very solid at certain things. They're not solid at some of those things. They can't tick some of those boxes. There are moments where they get counter-attacked on, and it's like, is that the way? I suppose in modern football, the counter-attacking side must then be prepared to be counter-attacked on because you're getting committed. But they don't seem very good at dealing with that. Their midfield control just isn't there. They don't have anyone who can control the midfield. Bruno Fernandes, I think there's a difference between eye test in the midfield and saying they're controlling it. That's two different things. Having control of the ball is one thing. Having control of the game is a whole other thing. Being able to make good passes and pass an eye test like that, I think Bruno passes that really well. but then it was weird. The point I wanted to make about United was more, I think 66% of the time, they're actually doing a lot of things where I'm like, okay, I see what you're going for. That's not enough for the game to win the game. The other 33%, you're kind of like, damn, that's lost you that game. Because in the 33%, they're so weak. So percentage-wise, I'm talking about time. But in terms of percentage of emphasis and how important the actions they're making in that 33% of the time are, it's the opposite. It's like they're doing 33% of the right stuff 66% of the time.
Yes, and the problem is
66% of the wrong stuff 33% of the time.
And if a game lasts 100 minutes, you can't afford to be shit for 33 of them because you'll ship goals, you'll get red cards.
Exactly, and you will lose control of the game in the way that you want it. And, whether he wants to play with control or not, even a counter-attacking side is control. In modern football, it is not 4-4-2, we will counter-attack, you will come on to us. It is, when we're counter-attacking, we're still trying to control the way that we're counter-attacking. We're still trying to control the way that you move, so we can move you into a position similar to boxing, where you counter-punch. You don't just go, I'm going to counter-punch now.
No, and we mentioned the Arsenal City game earlier. When they were countering, they were so conscious of losing it themselves and what was going to happen.
Exactly.
The other thing about United is, we were having this chat yesterday around Bernardo Silva versus Bruno Fernandes, because they're both Portuguese and they play a similar role, albeit Bernardo Silva now plays a bit deeper. And the difference between them, I think Bernardo's better at both sides of the game, but it's mostly off the ball. It's the control point.
But that's my point. Okay, right, so yeah, that's...
The counter-pressing, the awareness of when we have the ball, if we lose it, what's going to happen?
Yes.
Bernardo Silva, you all the time see, give away a free kick, give away a free kick, give away a free kick. Because he's thinking, shit, they're 3 passes from being out here. If you watch the Newcastle versus United game on the weekend, Bruno Fernandes does not have that thought.
Right.
And he's the captain.
And that's kind of, I think our comments were very telling after our comments about Bruno Fernandes. There's clearly a lot of people who love him. I think in a more balanced, more sure of its identity team, Bruno's probably a player that thrives.
Exactly.
I just think, weirdly, there's a bit of disjunction between him as the captain and United at the moment. I feel like the midfield doesn't really have the identity it needs right now. And weirdly, like, he's not helping with that identity, I don't think.
I was just going to say, you mentioned that there's maybe too much of an emphasis on players and not enough on systems. He's a perfect example. In a team confident in its identity, winning games, scoring goals, he's probably a great player. But for me at the moment, I know people didn't love this take from us. It was sort of contentious. He doesn't do enough on the ball to justify the lack of control of it.
Yeah.
There are examples of players where that is not the case. Lionel Messi does not do historically a huge amount off the ball. At least not since he turned 27.
Sure.
That doesn't matter because he justifies it on the ball. Bruno Fernandes isn't in that conversation really. And the ratio of good and bad, and all players have a ratio of good and bad. There's very few who you go, oh my God, they're breathtaking at both. Bernardo Silva is breathtaking at both. And I think he's probably a little bit unlucky in that way. He's in a side that isn't... He's the captain, so it's not half his fault. He's contributing. But if he signed for City today, Bruno Fernandes, in 6 months, he'd look like a great player.
And, I'm sure you could make great arguments about the other day with Galatasaray, and Manchester United were very much in control, but then they had to play their way back into it. And, we can go down that whole route of Manchester United.
But that's your point.
That's
your point about them looking good 2/3 of the time.
Right.
Right?
The issue with looking good 2/3 of the time, and I think to an extent they know what their direction is. I think they broadly know where Erik ten Hag wants to take them. We could talk about Manchester United and director of football or, their overall, but I think they know this season what their velocity is. It's not just speed without direction. They know what their velocity is.
I find them going to be a counter-attacking side quite depressing.
I think because it feels short term.
Yeah, but that's it feels like such a concession from Ten Hag because he's not a counter-attacking manager.
No, at least not historically, yeah.
And he went in and signs players that weren't counter-attacking, really. Like Anthony isn't a counter. He's not a quick winger who stretches you. He's a, hey, we have control kind of player.
Yeah, you're sitting deep and I'm going to go past you and do X, Y, Z and humiliate you and you're sort of vulnerable on the back of me looking so good.
And this is the last thing I'll say on United here is like, it's depressing to me that they've taken the backward step when now you're right, they are trying to be a counter-attacking team.
Well, so that's where the comments from Roy Keane interested me because Roy Keane was basically saying, look, Rashford's 26 now. Good point. He's not a kid. He's still relatively young, but he's not a kid. I mean, he is a kid, but he's not. he's seen as one of the more senior, long-term Manchester United players. He should be doing more. It's not that he doesn't care. It's not that he doesn't want to be part of this team. It's not that he sees his future elsewhere. I think he feels a little bit like, I think it feels, not he feels, it feels like he's not got a role that he's comfortable in at Manchester United. And I think there's big differences there between Arsenal, Liverpool, City and Manchester United. I can name you, in fact, I'd struggle not to name you a player that if Liverpool were down, you couldn't go, I could see them going, right, come on guys. Like, let's just...
And it's a matter of
let's go.
And it's a matter of degree. On the one hand, you have Martial, who probably doesn't care that much. And on the other hand, you have Roy Keane away at Juventus.
Right.
I'm suspended for the final, but I'm going to drag us by the nostrils.
Yeah.
You're not expecting that every week from Marcus Rashford.
You don't want that every week because you don't want to have to drag your team every week.
Exactly, but you are expecting a little bit more proactivity.
But that's so you can see that in both in all three of the other actual title contenders. And to an extent, like that's what disappoints me about Mason Mount leaving Chelsea. I'd love to see him in this Chelsea team right now. I think he'd be one of those people at Chelsea, and he should be one of those people at United who's going, come on, lads.
He'd play every week for Chelsea, is my sense.
He should be playing every week for United. I know he's injured or has been injured or whatever. He should be playing every week for United.
But it's less obvious to me, though, because in a counter-attacking team, it's a little bit of like, we're going to just sit in and counter.
Right.
Simple, but kind of how it looks. At Chelsea, they press really high. And that's where Mount is best for me. When he's off the, all of that intelligence off the ball. And I think the problem for him a bit is he comes in for Eriksen with 25 minutes left in the midfield too, as a pivot. And you think, Christ, like, that's not where he's best.
Is this where you need him? Is this really where you want him? Not really.
Not massively. I mean, one question I just have for you about Chelsea is how much of a difference do you think Nkunku will make? And whether, had he been fit at the start of the season, you think Chelsea might be in this conversation alongside Arsenal and Liverpool?
I think Nkunku might be one of the but one of the many reasons that Mason Mount was sold. They felt there was a change in the shape. They felt there was a change in the need within the side. Still feel like he'd be good. I mean, they're playing Conor Gallagher every week. I feel like there's a couple of players they're missing. I feel at the moment they've obviously got Nicholas Jackson. I think they're missing what a lot of other people have got the profile of, is that big, young, hungry, actual kind of centre forward-esque type player. I don't feel they've got that. Armando Broja, the young Albanian, is good, but he's been injured too much. Even when I have discussions with Albanian Chelsea fans, they're like, yeah, he should probably go, like, he's good, but is he what we need right now? Could we not get this guy? And so Victor Osimhen or Vlahovic would be an interesting one. That's where they lack for me. And I think Nkunku off someone like that would just be devastating.
Well, you know who I always think this about clubs missing a centre forward in the Premier League, is why has Olivier Giroud not been playing for them for the last 3 years? Because he's the type of player who brings in a 10. I know he's injured.
No, I get it.
But to your point, like, he's a goal scorer who gets on the end of things, who holds the ball up brilliantly, who drops in, who gets the best out of.
I don't think you're wrong. I just think there's an element of personality type, consistency. He's very consistent, but he's a World Cup winning centre forward. Can a modern Premier League side afford to play Olivier Giroud for what they perceive in the Premier League as the misgivings of a player like Olivier Giroud? Do you get what I mean by that? Like, I'm not saying he won't run. I think he looks very good in this. In all the sides he's played in since he's left the Premier League, in terms of all the different iterations, and obviously in the France side.
Better than what they've had is my suggestion.
I would say though, Olivier Giroud for me is almost, he's a compromise from what they actually need though.
Which has been his role at every club he's been at.
So he's seen as like
a
halfway
compromise.
house.
Yeah, no, he is.
But actually, as a halfway house, he's France's all-time top goal scorer.
And a World Cup win.
Yeah.
And a World... I mean, it's ridiculous. He's the top goal scorer. And Mbappe, who's like 14 years younger, not actually, but kind of almost, is breathing down his neck. But at Arsenal, at AC Milan, wherever he's gone, he's been viewed as, we're not going to win the league with you. And I'm not saying City should have bought him instead of Haaland or anything outrageous. I'm just trying to make the point that I don't know what Chelsea have had up front for the last few years.
If you're Chelsea, if you're Spurs, if you're maybe not Spurs because they've had Harry Kane, but like,
But I think almost anyone else.
Yeah.
Manchester United have Martial up front.
I think that's kind of the point. There is also, if you're him, you would know that in a Premier League side, you're not the long term. And I think a lot of these sides, it's probably just been a case of where they are in their life cycle compared to where he is. Whereas Milan is kind of an island of misfit
Premier League toys.
Like Chanel toys, but like, misfit toys. So it's like, hey, were these all dumped out of John Lewis? Good quality, but like, and still toys that other kids didn't want.
And my suggestion, given his age, etc., and can't really press, isn't really the Premier League side should sign him. But I'm trying to make the point about the misgivings of centre forwards in the Premier League.
Mm-hmm. You're not wrong. And that leads quite neatly, actually, onto. I really should speak into the mic. That leads quite neatly onto Spurs and why Spurs are not title contenders.
What do you think?
Well, they were a couple of weeks ago. In terms of perception, injuries is the main one. I think they've got to get through this injury period. And even then, I think having players who are like injured for sustained periods messes with your rhythm. It messes with your gelling. It messes with probably what Ange wants to develop. And he probably wants to get a look at some of these players and go, are you my guy or one of my guys? And you can't do that if a player's injured. You can obviously see their personality. You can see all these kind of things. But, you need someone who you can have out on the field consistently. And Ange plays a fairly demanding style of football, which means you can't have these injuries more than a couple of times a season. And it has been their detriment now.
They've lost. If they could have avoided losing 3 players, they would have literally said the 2 centre-backs and James Maddison. Mm-hmm. And they lost the 2 centre-backs and James Maddison. Mm-hmm. Oh, and for good measure, Bentancur. And for good measure, Sarr. So you've just lost, I'm not exaggerating about this, the entire spine.
The entire spine, and then that spine which complements the other players that complement that spine. So,
for example, Son isn't as good without Maddison. I mean, he's great, but he's not as good without Maddison.
Right. They've not had Kulusevski for ages.
God, and you're getting Ben Davies, who did, he's done totally fine, but you're getting him to play some of the most ambitious football on the ball for a centre-back.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that they've done so well, even in their defeats, has been very impressive.
I don't hate that. Like, I obviously think it shows an element of character which I really respect. Sorry, I'm just looking for the fixtures that we had so I can look at their starting lineup. But they started a back line of Destiny Udogie, Ben Davies, Emerson Royale, Pedro Porro. The 2 centre-backs in there are the real issue. And, Yves Bissouma and Lo Celso, Yves Bissouma got a very low rating in this game, by the way.
And
but
Lo
Celso as well.
Lo Celso, who scored, was out on loan last year.
They've also got Brennan Johnson and Brian Gill.
Brian Gill was out on loan last year. Mm-hmm. Brennan Johnson looks good, but was a Forest last year and is a little bit raw. Lo Celso was great, but I don't think he's necessarily the well-rounded midfielder they want.
And you can see, I think, what's weird about it is they've also got Richarlison in the team or in the side. Outside of Richarlison and Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, maybe Oliver Skipp. That's a pretty light bench. Fraser Forster, Brandon Austin, Dorrington, Santiago, Veliz, and Donnelly. Like, arguably, a lot of those names, I'm going to be saying them. Some people will be hearing those for the first time.
Yeah, I think the fact that they went and played their football there is cool. The fact that they did it and got a result is even cooler.
I think you're kind of shocked. I think City are very shockable this season. I was there for one of those. I mean, how many shock results have they had? Maybe 5 this season?
They've lost 3, drawn 3, and then had the Champions League being down a couple of times.
Bit of a shock against Leipzig. I mean, I don't think Pep thought he'd be 2-0 down at any point to Leipzig, who did a lot of what Spurs did, actually. Like, they moved it out to the wide positions, then moved it back in, or went basically into the 2 channels on either width. It works.
But the point about them is they probably don't have the depth.
Right. Now, let's talk for a second about City to finish the pod. I don't think their summer went the way they thought it would go. And I've kind of held on to this theory for a while. I think it scans. I think they thought they were going to get Bellingham. I think then they were too late to pivot to Rice. I can't see that Nunez was their first choice in terms of overall want. I think he may have fitted into a bigger midfield rebuild. And I think they probably wanted to move on Calvin Phillips. I think given the chance, if they'd have got Bellingham, I think they would have moved on Bernardo Silva.
It's interesting.
That's not to say that Bernardo Silva is not wanted, or that, people go, well, he was wanted to sign a contract and we always wanted, he's a club legend, mate. That's not the point. The point is pragmatism. The point is moving forward. The point is, if Bellingham's in the side, how much time does Bernardo Silva get? If KDB's fit, if there are all these other if, buts, and maybes.
You also have the fact that Bernardo Silva, who I love, plays an advanced 8 role, which is where KDB, Bellingham, Foden, Alvarez, for God's sake, might play. So you're right, the summer maybe didn't go the way they wanted. I will say, I don't think it matters a huge amount. I think once they get Stones and Kevin De Bruyne back, they may well feel a lot more.
I get that, but the point is more. They would have had the depth and maybe the coping mechanism in midfield to deal with Rodri or KDB not being there. I'm not saying they don't have the coping mechanism, but I am saying that. I think it would have just been more fluid. Look at the way that Bellingham has hit the ground at Real Madrid. Obviously, that's been facilitated by Madrid, but can you imagine the impact if he'd signed for a Premier League team? Obviously, I would love it to have been Liverpool, but City?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Nunes coming in, they also lost Gundogan, who kind of played that calming role and took a little bit of the pressure off Rodri.
But think about that. So it basically would have been Bellingham for Gundogan.
Exactly. And I think that would have offered a little bit more control. The other thing about City, and they've done this for years, so I'm not criticizing it, is if you look at their midfield, it's not really a 4-3-3, but if you read it that way, they've got Rodri, and the two midfield players, strictly speaking, are Bernardo Silva and Alvarez. Alvarez/Foden, depending on which one you want to say is where. And then they've got Haaland, Foden/Alvarez, Doku, or Grealish. So they're playing 5-10/strikers/wingers. And then you go, well, why don't they look good off the ball? Well, one of the reasons is they have the most amount of attacking players on the pitch of any Premier League side. And even Rodri, who's their most important player probably, isn't your midfield enforcer. He's not Declan Rice, who's going to sit there sweeping up. He can also press high and get caught.
Exactly.
So you're right. I think not getting Bellingham and not moving on Calvin Phillips
has stifled their development, should we say. And that's not to say that in January they won't go out there and sign a couple of great players. I think they probably will. I think there will be some really good progressive signings for City. I just think, to an extent, and I know they'll kick on second half of the season, I just think giving Liverpool and Arsenal this level of confidence this early on, losing to Arsenal, drawing with Spurs, these are results that previously you wouldn't have put going that way. And I think, we can say, oh, well, last season this happened. We're applying previous knowledge of a previous side that was previously probably stronger with the signings they had last season, or just the personnel. Obviously it just won the treble, but that's not that same team anymore. And so to analyse them in that same way, I think is disingenuous. In the same way as it would be disingenuous to say, well, look at Liverpool's midfield towards the end of last season. It's it's not really the same. You're not really analysing the same team.
Well, I'd say, though, I hear you, but what I'd say, I think, is that this City side, with 2 more players being fit, specifically Stones and De Bruyne, now does have a little bit more depth and does take the pressure off Rodri a bit.
I agree with that. I think Rodri needs the pressure taken
and
off him.
Nunes.
Sure, and I get that. I think that all the players you've named take some of the pressure off Rodri. I still think that's kind of my point, is there are injuries in every team. There are, in previous seasons we've heard Liverpool, Manchester United, everyone being told, you got injuries, get on with it. Same goes for City. I think sometimes we forget this with City, is because of the perfection that Pep is going for, sometimes we do forget. Sometimes perfection's not possible.
It's also not the biggest squad in the world.
Pep's always famous for having, notoriously small squads.
Ake and Stones and Akanji playing this quasi midfielder all the time kind of just makes you feel like the squad's bigger than it is.
Oh yeah, I get it. And don't get me wrong, that's pretty incredible. I think Ake and Akanji are also 2 players that I just think they're they've pushed City to another level defensively, because they tick every physical profile box. But on top of that, it's they're also amazing defenders. They're also great at progressing the ball. There have been times where we've seen how well they're testament to Pep's coaching. there are moments like where Ake got stuck under the ball,
Or a
the
Kanji
header.
Champions League final.
or a Kanji, where it's not that they're bad players, but it's just that there's only so far that coaching goes. It's not a criticism of them. It's just an observation that any personnel are going to have weaknesses. Everyone has even Rodri has weaknesses. Even Haaland has weaknesses to his. Like every top player does. Messi did. Ronaldo did. It's just how well you can mitigate those, I guess.
The other thing is, I think Calvin Phillips not quite fitting in has been a big problem for them.
Huge, but I think they've known that for some time, and I think that's why last summer felt so key to me. I felt they needed that turnover. It's always going to be difficult to move on those kind of players, and I think really I think it shows that even the best laid plans, which I think they had, can be subject to disruption.
In 99-2000, so the year after United won the treble, that was quite a bad United side, but they won the league still. And I can see some version of that being true this year for City. Like a side that's like significantly worse than the side the year before, still having enough to get over the line. Because there isn't an outstanding title challenger. There's two very good ones.
Interesting.
I think
you don't think Arsenal are outstanding?
I don't think they're outstanding, no.
You don't. Would you say? I think there are outstanding elements to their game, but I think the overall shock and awe, to coin an American term, is not quite there with Arsenal. And I think it's the same with Liverpool. Well, I think they definitely left Fulham shocked and awed, but I get what you're saying.
They're both very, very good. In fact, they're both much better than I thought they'd be this year.
Sure.
And either of them could go on and win the league. And I would say you're brilliant champions. But my sense is there isn't like do you remember when Liverpool and City used to push each other and have these epic battles? There's no side at that level, let alone two sides. Yeah.
Okay. Well, who do you think wins it? Just as a bit of fun. You don't have to. I'm not going to.
I think City win it. I think it's then Liverpool, but Christ, it's close, and then Arsenal.
I've got a feeling it's not City this year, but then I had that feeling last year and I had that feeling the year before.
4 in a row seems a little bit unbelievable. Like, there's a reason why it's not been done before.
It's a compelling argument for an in-season tournament. Right. Thank you very much for joining me on the podcast as it is right now, the current iteration of it. We're in the works, behind the scenes, putting together the graphic, as it will be called. And yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy it, but hopefully you enjoy the podcast overall. If you have it listened on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else, please review it. Please share it with a friend. If I can ask one thing, it's that you would share it and then someone else finds it, either on Twitter or on Instagram, or even just going over to a friend and going, I like football, you like football, let's bond.
These guys talk about football.
Yeah. Thank you very much for watching us. Appreciate it. And we'll see you guys again right here real soon. Bye-bye.
See you later.